are going to kick off this conversation talking about something that's been in the news a little bit of late, and that is 5G deployment near airports and what we like to call much ado about nothing. And I will say, as a preface that of course safety is always important, right? So we're not making light of this and saying that, for air travel safety is not a really important thing. However, what we've seen in the media, I think, over the course of the last couple of weeks is, I think, a lot of hype and sometimes, without really maybe getting all the facts. I don't know for sure, but let me back up and just say, news out at the end of last week was that federal regulators agreed to allow Verizon and AT&T to put more 5G towers near airports. And this comes on the heels of US airlines warning in the last few weeks of what they have described as, potentially catastrophic circumstances for aviation and the economy if super fast 5G mobile services expanded without more safeguards. And airlines warned that 5G cellular antennas near airports could distort readings from radar altimeters, and those things tell pilots how far they are from the ground, which is, slightly important. So so we've had all of this, hype and worry and alarm and news that, foreign airlines were canceling flights potentially and all of that sort of thing. And I will say that, in my personal opinion, this has largely been a communication problem. Okay. And we've had a steady breakdown in coordination and cooperation between the FCC, which regulates the business use of public airwaves, and other federal agencies, the FAA, and airlines. And so it's kind of like when Verizon and AT&T were ready to do exactly what they said they were going to do on the time schedule that they said they would follow. All of a sudden, people started raising their hands, going, "But wait!" And so it's been, and part of what our research has indicated, part of this problem is not that neither the FAA nor the FCC required airlines or mobile companies to conduct real world tests in advance of this to see how, whether this was a concern. And, I think that what we've also seen is a little bit of government bureaucracy at work, and, wheels that are slow to turn. And one other part of the problem that I think is important to mention, there is a lack of a national spectrum policy. And, as we see, as our world goes more and more wireless and airways get more and more crowded, we've got to have better coordination between the FCC and other federal agencies. And so I think that this is a latest in a series of standoffs that we've seen between the FCC and federal agencies. We need to do a much better job of communication on that front. And so, in my view, it was welcome news that, out, as I said, late last week, that would allow Verizon and AT&T to move forward. It's important. Ron, I know you have some thoughts on this front.
Well, I agree wholeheartedly. I think yes, it generated hype, some headline news, but really it was fundamentally much ado about nothing. I mean, some of the headlines suggested that the FCC would be sociopathic enough to, just squeeze out some more 5G spectrum, but at the risk of, having airplanes crash land. That was never the case, and it simply
Right.
didn't jibe with the facts that we know already. So fundamentally, it came down to absurd allegations because already 40 countries, not
Right.
two or three other countries, already have approved similar C-band spectrum around airports. And what's even more remarkable is that the FCC has mandated an even larger guard band around airport environments. That is
Right.
220 megahertz guard bands around the 5G spectrum that's used in the C band around airports. And that's twice as much as Japan for example, which has 90,000 5G base stations that are in operation, and of course, in and around airports. So now that's a pretty
Right.
valid use case. Like, this is not going to cause any issues that the FAA and the airline industry were asserting. And so that kind of begs the question: why, this, somewhat, underwhelming
Brouhaha,
clash?
brouhaha.
Yeah, exactly. Kerfuffle. Yeah. What's the incentive here? And from my perspective, it was a feeble attempt to have the telecommunications industry foot the bill for upgrading altimeters, around airports,
And
and
that's
that's
crazy.
needed.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think that was just the false path. And to your point, this has happened before. A couple
right,
of years ago, the FCC and the NOAA were having to clash over, again, 5G spectrum allocation much higher up than C-band, around 37 gigahertz range. But you get the idea, that this is something that is not uncommon, but we definitely can benefit from that, national spectrum type plan that can
right,
smooth, this coordination and avoid, phony headlines and things like that. That doesn't benefit anybody, and kind of hides, agendas
right,
of one side of the government, and so forth. So
right.
I think this was resolved correctly. And yes, AT&T and Verizon are definitely responsible citizens, and
Yeah,
that obviously the 5G is definitely aligning with the requirements of airport safety, etc.
right.
So I'll leave it at that.
Well, and I think too, as I was looking at this, a couple things that I think are important to note. As you said, AT&T and Verizon have certainly not gone into this without doing due diligence. They've been testing 5G for a
Oh
long
yeah.
time, especially in the C-band spectrum. Another thing, as we were talking about and thinking about this, where's the military, right? If there were any danger at all, the military would arguably probably be one of the first people in line, right? The first organizations in line saying, wait, wait, there's potentially a problem. And the military has not. They've been largely silent on this front. They've been doing their own testing. I feel very confident that if they felt like there were any issues, they would have certainly come to the fore. And I think the last point here is that, hopefully this is a little bit of a wake up call for airlines because, airlines are notorious for not upgrading their equipment in a timely fashion. Many of the planes that we fly on are very, very old, right? And so I think that there comes a responsibility to them to be a little more timely on this front. And the bottom line, the consumer is the one that misses out. If there's any place that you want fast 5G connections, it's, in an airport before you board a plane, right? Ron, how many things are you doing at the last minute? Like,
Oh
oh my
yeah.
gosh, I have to download this, or my kids are like, oh my gosh, I better have Netflix on this plane. So anyway, it is, I think really the media has not been digging deep enough and taking some of the airlines and the FAA statements at face value. And you know what? It's really great to see this moving forward. And it is certainly time for that. So
Yeah, I believe the
absolutely.
FCC never shared the study they were basing this on, for example. So it's like, yes, let's please trust and verify people, please.
Right, exactly. And media, you know, I mean, you didn't see any of that. You didn't see, most of the
Not
things that we're
enough.
talking about, you really didn't see enough of that.
Right.
So, okay,
Right.
with that, we're gonna say that this again, 5G and airports and all the brouhaha around this is much ado about nothing. And if you're seeing this in the news and worried about it, we don't think you need to. And we're glad to see this moving forward. So now we're going to move on and we're going to talk about some news out today about Netcracker and T-Mobile and the extension of their strategic partnerships. And, it was great to see Netcracker announce today that T-Mobile has extended its BSS and managed services partnership for its wholesale business. Um, Providing BSS services, and Netcracker's BSS services, so that handles T-Mobile's billing platform for its wholesale business, and it includes, gosh, it includes more than just this wholesale business line, some things having to do with IoT and things like that. But also, Netcracker provides partner management services and other managed services to T Mobile. And this is important I think this is incredibly important, shows the importance of these kind of services, BSS services in particular. And it also shows, this kind of partnership is what allows a company like T-Mobile to focus on providing great customer experience across all channels. You can have a goal of wanting to do that, but you've got to have the right technology foundations in place to allow you to do that. So I know, Ron, you were excited by this news as well.
Oh yeah, no, I think you did a excellent job of hitting on the key points of the agreement extension,
Yeah,
and I believe this is definitely crystallizing the need for flexible dynamic billing in the
right,
5G era. That is, you want billing that can handle not just regular customer billing, but on demand billing, real time billing, and even more importantly is use case billing. And that I think comes across in the fact that Netcracker's digital BSS platform is supporting, yes, the wholesale model for T-Mobile, but also their IoT and MVNO
there we go. Yeah.
capabilities. And that
I knew you would know what it was beyond the IoT. Thank you for that.
and that's all important.
Mhm.
And definitely, I think it's demonstrating that the platform is not going to be restricted to one set of customers or one set of use cases anymore. It definitely has to be all encompassing. And I think also other important takeaway is that Netcracker's working with T-Mobile on the DevOps aspect of it. That is agile software development, which is going to be required. That definitely is going to
Right,
be requisite for improving time to market, turnaround, time to value, delivery, et cetera. That is enabling T-Mobile or any mobile operator out there to respond to customer demands in a much more rapid fashion,
right.
to adapt to new cloud requirements, new container management needs, et cetera. You name it. And this is all very, I think, important. And I think it demonstrates that the ecosystem is moving forward and getting these capabilities not just ready, but also having them deliver on things such as IoT, which I think has receded a little bit because of some of the security concerns that have cropped up with IoT. But now the
Right,
operators are becoming smarter about, yes, we definitely need security baked into IoT, and that could be part of the billing for an IoT service
right.
as people become more adept at adopting it on a more wide scale and flexible level.
Absolutely. Well, all in all, this is great news, great partnership. Obviously, things must be working. They've extended it, so good job on that front, Netcracker and T-Mobile. I think that's awesome.
No doubt.
So with that, we're going to move on. Since we're on the topic of T-Mobile, I ran across Opensignal's January 2020 report on 5G user experience, and according to that report, T-Mobile is cooking with gas, and they have a significant lead over both Verizon and AT&T in both 5G performance and coverage in the United States. And it's I will say that it is important to note here that based on our conversation earlier about C-band coverage and that's at airports and that sort of thing provided by AT&T and Verizon, T-Mobile isn't playing in that space, and the C-band deployments by those companies could impact this report moving forward. But for now, things look really great on the T-Mobile front. And I think that, what I looked at is that T-Mobile has won in the 5G download speed for the fifth time in a row, going from an average of 118.7 Mbps to 150. That's pretty impressive, right? And that's what everybody wants. Speed, speed and more of it. And in upload speeds, T-Mobile was also ahead of the pack at 17.9, although Verizon was creeping right along at 14.1. And so there were some other key metrics mentioned in the report. I will include that as part of our show notes here. But basically, T-Mobile is doing a terrific job as it relates to great user experiences and speeds and that sort of thing. Ron, did you get a chance to look at that report by any chance?
Oh yeah, I think it definitely demonstrates that T-Mobile has been very adept at executing its 5G strategy. Certainly a nationwide
Right.
one here in the U.S. And
Right.
clearly, the speed tests show that they definitely made some of the right bets in terms of their spectrum priorities, and I think that came across in the recent C-band auctions. And
Right.
I think it's also tying in with other initiatives that are also critically important to the success of T-Mobile or any mobile operator, let alone the overall 5G ecosystem. Specifically, speaking of having marketing momentum, T-Mobile announced that they fulfilled the renewable energy goals, the RE100 objective, and that is the entire 5G operations are now being run on renewable energy.
Yeah.
And that includes agreements with 19 retailers, 8 virtual power agreements, and so forth. And so the net result is that there are now 3.4 megawatt hours. So now we have to talk megawatt hours more and more, and
Right.
in addition to megahertz and
Right.
megabits and so forth.
Right.
But again, 3.4 megawatt hours. That includes green energy grids across states like Maine and Massachusetts, Minnesota, New York, and Oregon. And as a result, T-Mobile has landed again the Green America Wireless Scoreboard top score amongst mobile operators. So this is clearly a feather in the cap that they're
Right.
really combining the best of both worlds, delivering on the one hand the best performance and speeds, but also doing it in a very energy conscious way that is definitely executing on the sustainability goals that are so important and are integral to any organization's ESG
Right.
goals. So this is, I think, welcome news. The fact that T-Mobile is executing on these two vital fronts.
Yeah, and it would be prudent of me to mention here, I think, as we're on the topic of sustainability and ESG initiatives, our team here at Futurum is really passionate about all things ESG and actually DEI as well. And we believe that we have companies of all sizes who have planted a flag, especially in either one of these spaces, as it relates to DEI initiatives, as it relates to ESG initiatives. We believe specific to ESG that this is going to become increasingly important as time goes by. And just as, we saw organizations embrace digital transformation journeys and initiatives, right? Some more rapidly than others. But, all of a sudden we went from a space where, our team was actually working with clients on digital transformation initiatives and journeys before the term digital transformation was even, coined and widely used. So we've been kind of elbows deep in that space. But we think that ESG is going to be increasingly important, as important by comparison as digital transformation focuses are, because this is the path forward. This is what consumers care about, and the challenge here for organizations is that we've had so many companies plant their flag. I mentioned this already. Plant their flag, and that by 2025 or 2030 we'll be here, or 2040. And now what they're doing is saying, "Oh, holy, okay, well, we've said this. How are we going to get there, or how are we going to measure this meaningfully?" And so there are some really interesting times ahead as it relates to that. We have a new media property launching here in about a week called Good Equals Progress, which is focused on all things ESG and DEI. So we will invite you to be a part of that launch with us as that property launches. But know that we're going to be talking about that quite a bit moving forward. And good on you, T-Mobile, for for your efforts in the sustainability race. That's awesome. That's awesome news. So, and we
Hot
are going
topic.
to
Definitely go hand
hot
in hand.
a hot topic indeed. And you're going to see all of our analysts talking about these things more. You're going to see all of our analysts writing about these things more. So, if our listeners, if you have interesting initiatives going on, either DEI or ESG, we want to know about it, and you know where to find us. So, with that, I'm going to segue to our final topic of today, and that is all about AT&T and Dish and the Andromeda auction. And Ron, I'm going to let you bring us home on that one.
Well, thank you. Yes, speaking of C-band spectrum, which has
Right.
been very important and certainly what was a key factor in the the FAA controversy. And recently, the FCC conducted a C-band auction. And I think a little background is helpful. It was the third largest one in the FCC history. It was only behind last year's massive C-band auction of $81 billion,
Right.
where Verizon spent
Right.
a good fortune
Yeah.
to secure
Yep.
C-band assets. And then 2015's AWS-3 auction, which came in at $45 billion. So this auction netted $22 billion, and in it, AT&T spent $9 billion to, in essence, scoop up 1,624 licenses, followed by Dish with $7.3 billion spent on 1,232 licenses, and then T-Mobile with $2.9 billion spent in order to secure 199 licenses. So, it's an impressive haul for these three
Right.
players to gain, these valuable C-band assets at this stage of the 5G competitive race. And
Right.
what's I actually think important to note here is that Verizon did not partake; that even looked to pad their existing C-band assets after their major spend on last year's C-band
Right.
spectrum auction. So I think this is definitely worth noting, that why is C-band so valued by the operators? It fundamentally, it kind of provides a Goldilocks. Provides the combination of throughput and speed with coverage that
Right.
enables 5G to really hit its optimal capabilities, and that is in the 3.45 to 3.55 gigahertz range.
Right.
And so I think this is definitely something to definitely follow. That is, how spectrum is being allocated, how the major players are capitalizing on it. And I think one other takeaway is that when T-Mobile added those licenses and enabled them to remind the market, that the Andromeda auction, or auction 110, allowed them to add an average of 21 megahertz of midband to their existing spectrum
Right.
portfolio. And so that actually reaches to 184 million people. So that's a pretty
That's a lot.
sizable number to
Yeah.
improve your targeting on. And as a result, their overall 5G network can reach 310 million people, which allows them to serve. That's twice as much as what AT&T can do today, and five times as much as Verizon can do today. Although, as you noted with the speed test, those numbers will
Right.
change
Right.
as they bring AT&T and Verizon bring on more of their C-band assets to market, and make it commercialized and so forth. But definitely, we're going to keep an eye on the spectrum races, and definitely the auctions and so forth, and how it's definitely impacting the ability of the major mobile operators to feed the demand out there, to
Right.
make a big impact across all society, and not just for specific mobile applications and so forth. So this is good news overall for the whole industry, but certainly good news for AT&T, Dish, and T-Mobile from my perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, lots of interesting things happening in the 5G ecosystem. Ron, as always, it is my pleasure to partner to bring these shows to our team, to our audience. And thank you all for hanging out with us and listening. You can find resources to all the things that we talked about in the show notes. If you haven't yet subscribed to the 5G Factor, you can solve that problem really quickly by hitting that subscribe button on YouTube, or that subscribe button in your favorite podcast streaming platform. And we will see you again here next week. With that, we're out.